cannot enhance the service levels in terms of infrastructure when we prepare this plan. And the infrastructure must be built. The statute calls for that if we have the infrastructure in the plan, we have to build it within 10 years for non-utility related activities and within 15 years for water and wastewater. There's other things that you've heard us talk about, like separately accounting for these, making sure the funds are only spent in the areas they're supposed to be. And I want to also point out that the statute also requires that a qualified professional prepare the infrastructure plan and the underlying land use assumptions. Thus, we have a consultant assisting us on this project. So I wanted to kind of go over a little bit about the current fees. This is not here for you to be able to see the details of the map, but it's just to let you know that the dark area, the dark border represents the borders of Goodyear, and the light blue shaded area is the area where impact fees currently exist. So these are not, the fees do not cover the entire city, they just cover the areas where we've projected development to occur in the coming 10 years. A little closer look at that blue shaded area shows you, I think you know we've talked before about having south fees and north and central fees. This map shows you where the current fees are. The blue portion is the area we call north. The kind of pinkish area in the center is what we call central. And a lot of times you'll hear that north and central are actually combined into a single fee. And then at the bottom, it's two colors there, the greenish area and then the yellowish area. The greenish area is the south area for everything except water and wastewater. So police, fire, streets has that green area. The yellow area represents the area that water and wastewater covers. So they are only, so water and wastewater is in a smaller area than the rest of the fees in the south. And then just a little bit more detail on the water and wastewater, because we sometimes have confusion, because we'll talk about the north central water fees and wastewater fees, and as we know, we don't provide the water service north of I-10. We do provide some wastewater service of I-10, so this just shows you when we're talking about north and central when it comes to water or wastewater. The blue area is water and wastewater, and then the little area up on the northwest is wastewater. And then, of course, the green area is what you saw as the yellow area on the prior map. Kind of the next thing I wanted to kind of touch on is that we've approached this study with the policy direction that we've heard that growth pays for growth. And so what that means, if we've included the full cost of the infrastructure that we've identified, the growth would demand. In some cases, there may be some improvements that are required that are being triggered by growth or by the expansion of an existing facility. An example of that is in the streets area. There are some street projects in the plan or that we're developing right now that would add additional lanes to an existing street. If we have to relocate utilities as a result of widening that street, we've assumed that that's a cost of growth at this point in the plan. So those types of utility relocations would be included at this point. We've also included the cost of anticipated financing. You've heard me say before that we have to make loans to the impact fee funds if we want to advance projects. You know, the overall concept is we aren't going to collect all these fees before we have to build some of this infrastructure. So this plan incorporates the cost of financing those advancements. So we've made some general assumptions about when different pieces of infrastructure would be built and what amount of fees we might have collected by then, and therefore if we might have to finance some element of actually constructing the facility to be repaid by impact fees. We've also included the full 10-year demands where it's feasible. And what I mean by that is when we do this underlying forecast of the growth, it may say that the growth we're projecting requires that we build 10,000 square feet of fire station. Well, that may not be an entire fire station, but that's all we can charge to growth in that period. So as we go further through this, you may see there's cases where there might be less than a 30-acre park, and that's because growth would only demand, half of a 30-acre park. And given all of this, the fees are higher. You're going to see fees that are much higher than the current fees, and we'll work from here as we talk about your direction and your thoughts, as well as the public feedback. And I just kind of wanted to talk a little bit more about the changes from the current plan, and some of these are reasons why we're doing this now. The current plan does not include inflation, so the projects that are in the current year were costed in probably 2012, 2013 timeframe, and no inflation was added to them. So that means the first thing that we built was underfunded in the impact fee plan. And as we continue to march forward without having those inflationary costs in there, we are not collecting enough fees to pay for those facilities, which means that the rest of the general fund or the utility funds would have to bear the cost of those facilities. The current plan did not include that concept of partial facilities I just talked about. It didn't include, a tenth of a park beyond the one park that may have been included. And as I mentioned, there's financing costs assumed now, and there were not in the current plan. There is in the current plan some debt service payments that already existed that they're continuing, but that was specific for prior infrastructure. As you know, we've been here talking many times about the capital improvement program. And similar to what we're experiencing in the rest of the capital improvement program, these projects also had issues with scoping and cost estimates, and we are addressing those in the same manner that we've been addressing them in the update to the CIP. We're also clarifying what the street philosophy is. In the current plan, it seemed like there was not a consistent philosophy about what types of streets to include. So in this plan, we're going to clearly define it's these types of streets and these types of intersections that are included. And then it also, we'll talk a little bit about whether we need to have 3 geographic areas for streets. And then the last thing, when we get to parks, you're going to hear a little bit about that the distribution of the cost or the demand for the infrastructure by residential versus commercial uses is being changed. And are there any questions about just the general intro on impact fees? Because we're going to get into some real meaty stuff now, so if you want to take a shot at any general questions.
Question? Councilman Zillow? Go ahead.
Just general, when you talk about the 15-year, 10-year plan being completed, does that mean it has to be operational at that time, or that definition includes start within that period of time?
The statute is saying that we need to be delivering those levels of service, so we should have the facility operating.
It has to be operating at that point in time. Okay. And I'm sure you'll cover it in here, but my only concern as we go forward, the concern I've had with other CIP projects, and you've somewhat addressed that, is that we really scope these things out to make sure that if it's supposed to be done 3 years from now, we have some pretty good. Now, again, I don't expect you to be 100% on, but I expect you to be closer than some of these others that we've had. So, again, I really want to put a lot of effort in ensuring we scope those out really well. So,
thank you.
Any other questions?
Echo a little bit of what he said, is that we want to make sure we're on a spot where we promise something and then we can't deliver it, whatever it is. So if we're affecting other parts of our budget, so I know we'll get into that soon.
Yeah. Yes. Sherry?
And I might have missed it. I was just kind of looking back for it. Since we have to look at these so many years, if the growth starts to boom again, can we look at it in a quicker time frame, or are we just still bound?
No, in fact, Mayor, Council Member, we are ahead of what the statute requires. So the statute requires at least every 5 years, but we could do it more often. And we also have the ability, you've we're actually working on a small modification right now to the plan with regard to the south water area to incorporate the surface water plant. So depending on the nature of the change, some things can even happen without as big of a process, but they're limited to the fees can't go up by more than 5%, and you can't be changing the levels of service or the infrastructure. But yes, we can do it more often. It's just we have to do it every 5 years.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions? Yes, Molly?
Are you going to address the inflation part as we go forward?
Yes, Tony will address it. He'll talk about our inflation assumptions.
All right, and then at that time also we'll talk about the street philosophy.
Yes, Tony will cover that in more detail.
Perfect.
All right, any other questions? All right, go ahead. Tony?
Thank you, Lori. Good evening, Mayor and council members. So I'm going to take you through the couple of documents that Lori spoke about, the land use assumptions and the infrastructure improvements plan. We have 11 of them to go through, so I'm sure there'll be questions at the end, but there's a certain pattern to them as we go through, except for the streets. We have a little bit more information on the streets because it is a bit more complex. And then we'll summarize the fees and compare those to others and discuss, why they might be different than others and some of the implications of that. And then hand it back to Lori to talk about the path moving forward. Going into the land use assumptions, that one, okay. So I did not introduce, I apologize, Rick Merritt from Elliott D. Pollock and Company, who helped prepare the land use assumptions. He's trying to, yeah, he's protected. So their source data for the land use assumptions is the Arizona Department of Economic Opportunity and MAG, the Maricopa Association of Governments. So the time period for the land use assumptions, per the statute, has to be at least 10 years. And when I talk about the infrastructure improvements plan in a minute, it is up to 10 years. So both of them are 10 years. The land use assumptions are from 2019 to 2028. And we broke them down by those areas that were mentioned earlier. What we're referring to as the north area, central area, and south area, so we could understand the dynamics of each. And in a nutshell, the north area being a smaller bounded area has a lower growth rate of 2.1% over that period, and it fluctuates from year to year. The central area at 4.2%. It actually is a larger base, so it's actually a larger amount of growth, but the percentage is 4.2. In the south area, which is limited to north of Pecos Street and south of the river, is 7.3%. But again, you're starting with a smaller base, and that growth rate is a bit higher there. Citywide, that's 4.2%. That's the general breakdown of that. And so the important drivers for the fees are service units, and so the first is population, the second is jobs. Population is related to the residential units and the jobs to the non-residential, and there's four major categories of non-residential that the jobs feeds into. But the total service units, you'll see throughout the presentation, the north central growth over the 10-year period, and the combined north central is 38,027, and the south is 18,697 for a total of 56,724. The reason we combine the north and central is you currently have only one of your fees that actually is separated in the north, and that's the streets. And what we've looked at in looking at your projects and the dynamics is to combine those together. Because of the similarities of being driven off of growth either off the 303 or around I-10 and so forth. So it made sense to look at those combined. That's why we have it combined here. Most of the fees we still have separated in the south, and we'll discuss that here in a minute. So when I go through the infrastructure improvements plan, you'll see divided by service units. Some of those numbers are going to vary because the service area may be limited. The water is limited where it's not offered in the north. The wastewater, only a partial part of the north. So the numbers will vary because of the dynamics of the service units. But that's the underlying projections. And then translated into single-family, multifamily housing over that time period by area. And remember, The growth rate in the south was quite a bit higher, but again, because we're starting with a lower base, the actual increase in units is less than the central. So most of the growth is still in the central, but percentage-wise, it's the highest in the south. And then you see the non-residential land use is industrial, commercial, institution, and office and other. And most of that is in the north and central, and very little in the south is projected. So the south is primarily residential. So I'll touch upon the level of service a little bit, and then as we go through each of these fees, as I mentioned, we have 11 to go through. Each of those will address the level of service. But the key element is that the statute says that the cost must be based on the same level of service as existing development. So you have the plan in place now from approximately 4 years ago. That's the current plan. The actual is, and the actual will fluctuate depending on where you are in time as far as facilities and population. So it's always sort of changing, but the one thing that's important is that you're not increasing that for new development, because that would clearly go against the statute. I'll speak to, again, most of these as I go through. We'll address, for example, parks, where we have the improved acreage per 1,000 service unit in north, central, and south. The current actual is actually less than your current plan. So we're looking at our new infrastructure facilities of not having more than what you're currently providing. And as I said, I'll go through each of these. The water does have an increase based on a recent study done for the city, and the wastewater actually has a decrease. So the infrastructure improvement plan, and again, this is the other major document required for the statute. One of the tenets of the statute is the facilities have a life expectancy of 3 or more years and is owned and operated by the city or on behalf of the city. And generally, with a development impact fee, you're looking at longer-lived assets that are there to provide the service. So the assumptions, again, are the same time period. It has to, per statute, has to be up to 10 years, so we have the same 10-year period. The project costs are developed by staff and enhanced or originally taken from consulting documents, whether it's the Integrated Water Master Plan or your street and traffic consultants as well. There are current cost levels as of today. When we go back and look at sources such as an engineering news record, who keeps track of costs over time, over the past 5-10 years or so, they've averaged just around 3% a year. So we're assuming 3% as a reasonable assumption moving forward. And that's common throughout all the projects, except those that are either being bid out now or going to be done in the very near future. So the first one we'll go through is police. And police is the only current fee area that is common to all 3 of those areas, in north, south, and central. Okay? And so we have no proposed change to that. And so the general order of each of these fees is first up top is the description of the improvements, police stations, police cars, and radio tower expansion. And then we have the growth demand in that 10-year period. So even though, as Lori mentioned before, even though the facility may be sized differently, the sizing of things doesn't necessarily match a 10-year period. So, but what we're doing here is you're matching the amount of facility that's being used by the 10-year growth. So the growth in demand based on the level of service is just under 20,000 square feet. And just some details about the improvements is this is phase 2 expansion of the police facility. It does not, some things that we have to be careful of is not including some costs that are excluded in the statute, such as training is explicitly excluded. So we made sure those costs are out. The total cost of the facility expansion is just under $10 million. The other major cost is equipping officers. As you grow, additional officers are needed. So the growth of demand of officers is tied to police cars, with 33 additional over that 10-year period, just under $1.9 million. And the third item, radio tower expansion, is currently not in your fees, although the city does have 2 radio towers now. A third one would be included into the plan as we have it proposed now at $4.9 million. So you look over that 10-year period, that's 16 point, call it $8 million of improvement. And I mentioned the service units at the beginning. So this is for all the areas that I mentioned before in the land use assumptions of $56,724. And that gives you an average cost of $296 per service unit. And then you do the math, convert it. For example, persons per household is 2.86. So a single family fee would be $846. And there's a conversion for the other land uses as well. So that's the general pattern of how the rest of them are going to follow. It's just the facilities are different, the service units are sized to the area, and the level of services are specific to each area.
Yes, you've got some time to go. Is that right, Tess? You're right?
Yeah, because this one is going to follow a pattern. You may have some questions that'll
Yes,
help.
thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
And that's why I wanted to ask
Sure.
it now. So, you know, as I went through this earlier, I'm looking at this and I'm going, I don't know what this means on this
Right.
level of service. I mean, what is 0.335 per
Yeah.
square foot? And so, and I know you hit upon it, but I think I'm still not grasping it, is that, so what is the target? If we're saying this is what the level of service
Right.
is, I don't know what the target is.
That is the target, and the square footage is really tied to people or officers and the building space that's required to house them. So what you're looking at is, if, for example, if you're growing tremendously in population, but you're not keeping pace with that level of service, then it'll be declining, and the ability of police to respond and so forth is going to deteriorate. So that's an indication. And two, it's required per the statute to have a level of service and not overbuild facilities. Like we can't have a grand plan and overbuild facilities and charge that to new growth. And
I guess where I'm struggling is I don't know if that's on par for the course as a good target, or if we're behind, or if we're ahead. That's where I was struggling with, is to not have a comparable. I guess is where.
Yeah, Mayor,
I
Councilmember.
get you've got formulas of math, but I don't
Right.
have that, and so I couldn't figure out what this meant.
I think another way to say it is, so for example, if I look at the level of service there for police vehicles, today we have 0.57 vehicles per 1,000 residents.
Okay.
That's the highest level we could include in this impact fee update, because we cannot exceed the current level of service in developing these fees. So we can't make a judgment in developing these fees that we wish our service level were higher. We can just build it on today's service level.
I see.
And that, I think Tony also mentioned that they looked different from the last time, and it does, when we take these windows or looks in time, if we've just built a fire station, our service level might be a little higher in that particular window because that fire station might not be fully consumed yet by growth. And so we could achieve, we could set the fees at a lower level of service, but we would probably still have to find a way to fund bringing in the infrastructure at the level growth demands. But we're not in a situation where we can say, gee, we really wish we had one vehicle per 1,000 residents, at least with this fee. We could do that in other parts of the city's budget, and then the next time we updated the fees, our service levels would be higher, and then we could charge higher fees at that point in time.
That's where I was
Does
struggling,
that
not
help?
knowing the goal.
Yeah.
I mean, that's
So
what I wasn't sure.
today, it is a maximum set by our current service
Okay.
level.
That helped.
So
Thank you.
basically, you may have your own personal goal on this, but you're not going to meet it just because of the process. I mean,
Correct.
they do keep you sort of, okay, so we get to a point, I'm sorry, I shouldn't interrupt, but sometimes I want to talk. Okay, so we're looking at, complaints from citizens, and they say, you just don't have enough of this. And we say, well, at this period of time, and it's because of the process. You can't get ahead of it. So an impact fee, someone's not going to say, hey, you're living off me, you're increasing your fire department and your library off our earnings. So I think that makes sense to me now. But there isn't really a defined formula like you want, and the number's exact.
Right.
And they probably won't never be under getting impact fee. Joe?
I think Lori did a good job of explaining it, but I think it's state statute. And unfortunately, if we wanted a service level at 0.75 vehicles per 1,000, but we've been running at 0.57, state statute prevents us from doing that, at least with these fees.
Yes.
Now, if you want to use your general fund to bring it up to 0.75, you can do that. But state statute we have to keep the level of service that we have now. And that just happens to be the way it is. So all we can do is, as a council, if we decide that we want to up that service level, we're going to have to find other ways of funding it. Is that a fair assumption?
Yes.
Okay.
Our growth, you've got to remember, if you compare our growth to some of the other cities, the growth has made a big effect. Sherry?
Yeah, that's what I'm getting, exactly what Joe said. So then if we want to up our service level, because we said, well, we're just barely meeting our service level, we're going to have to use general fund money to do that, and then go back and once we have put our own money in that and reassess for impact fees for future growth, which is why it's important, I guess, we stay on top of these and not let them lapse too long if we have a long period of growth or need. Is that a fair statement?
Yes.
Brandon?
I'm going to piggyback on hers too. So level of service, so if we get to a higher level of service in the next 5-year assessment, then we can stay at that level, right? And then we go from there, and then the next 5 years, it will keep going up. Okay. And then I know we're talking about infrastructure. I'm probably answering my own question, but I know we're talking about infrastructure. This is all capital type improvements. Yes. So we're not talking about, there's not a ratio, at least in this framework, for per officer per 1,000 person, per 1,000. We're assuming that in the cars and the police station square footage.
Correct.
No personnel. That'd be
No, if I understand your question is, it's not paying for personnel, it's paying to equip, vehicles for personnel, yeah.
Okay.
But not personnel costs.
Yeah, we
per
could
se,
use
operating.
it on personnel costs. So.
Right, you cannot.
All the questions finished? Go ahead.
Okay. So, yeah, the general takeaway is, growth pays for growth, and the statute basically, if you were to put it in layman's terms, is the growth can't pay for more than what you're providing. And then one of the things about the indicator is if it declines, then you're getting behind, and growth is not paying for growth. It would be an indication if it were to deteriorate over time. That could be one effect of that. Okay, so the fire has currently 2 service areas. It has the north and central, and on this slide, the next slide will be the south. So in the north central is fire station, West Goodyear Fire Station. You see the square footage increase of just about 10.5 million. And then the apparatus and the trucks and so forth, 4 trucks for the station of $3 million. One of the things you'll see here that there's existing DIFIS development impact fee balances. So you have those available to apply towards growth-related projects. They have to be used, and you may have covered this, but the fees that you collect for fire north central have to be used on those type of facilities. You can't use them in the south. You can't use them for police or streets or what have you. So you apply those existing balances to net out that total. Divide by the service units for the north central and come up with the cost per service unit, convert it to single family fee. You see the level of service of 0.55 building space per resident and 0.11 apparatus per 1,000 residents there. So maintaining that level of service moving forward. Again, the same concept that growth is paying its own way, but not paying more, but maintaining your level of service. And in the south, again, smaller area, so the building space is only 7,384. This is a new station in the south, the cost of $3.3 million, 2 trucks, $1.5 million, and less service units, but again, that ratio is 231 cost per service unit, single family fee, $660. And you'll see that level of service is similar to the North Central under this plan. Currently, that level of service is higher than the North Central. And it was higher during the last study, it was higher, and it's gotten lower over time. So right now, the South and the North Central are the same level of service. One of the differences in the South is that there's a reimbursement for Newland for developing the fire station. So that's one reason for having the different service areas at this point. Next fee area is parks. There's two in parks, North Central and then South. So first, the North Central is Central Goodyear Park, 30 acres. And that's the limit per the statute, unless there's a direct benefit to that particular growth. That cost is $14.7 million, and also the community park at 13.2 acres at $8.5 million. Subtract out the existing balances, that nets out $20.8 million of improvements over the next 10 years. The average cost per service unit, $785 for a single-family fee of $2,244. You see that level of service of 1.69 acres per thousand residents, and that compares to the existing, pardon me for a minute, of the current plan is 2.3. So this is less than the current plan. Now, that's not to say that is the current plan, was it too ambitious? You know, what the reasons for that are, you know, it could vary. But again, per the limits of the statute, we're limited to 1.69 for the acreage that we have here. I was going to make one other point. At the end, we do compare these fees to your existing, so you know where the impact is. This is one that has a good size increase, and really what you're doing is trying to maintain that level of service. You saw with the lower fees what's happening to your level of service, and this is an indication of that right here, of when you let when the fee's not capturing all the costs, and I think it was a decision at that time to limit the amount of parks that went into the fee. So again, that's a policy decision moving forward. You can do less. This has you maintaining what you have now. Okay. So the South Parks includes the Foothills Phase 2 of the Foothills Park in the South area, 14.5 acres. It also, I mentioned before about reimbursement. So Newland also constructed park infrastructure down there, so there's still fees. So again, the way this works is as fees are collected down there for parks, it reimburses Newland for their contribution, just like if the city were to make that contribution. You can see that fee is pretty close to the North Central at $22.93, and that level of service is actually a bit less in the South. Again, part of that has to play with the dynamics. Remember, the growth rate was a little higher in the South, even though there was less residents. So those dynamics will play over time. So again, by looking at this fee level, you'd at least be able to maintain your level of service in the South. Okay, so I'm going to deviate a little bit from the pattern for a moment on the streets. As Lori mentioned before, the streets philosophy is to more equate them across the service area. So right now, arterial roads are either 4 or 6 lane roads that they're different from collector roads, which are localized neighborhood roads, generally 2 lane. Arterial roads are either 4 or 6 lane. In the plan are road improvements, and they're significant. We have a slide on it, that aren't going to be installed by a developer, that they're right adjacent to the development, that the development would be required to make those improvements. These are, I would call, more regional improvements, whether they're north, south, or east, west, to move traffic across the city, and they're not necessarily localized. Your current plan is limited to 6 lane arterials only, so it does not fund any 4 lane arterials at all, and a significant amount of your improvements are 4 lane arterials, most of them out there, okay? So again, I think that may have been a policy choice or whatever, but here we're broadening that. It also includes traffic signals from arterial to arterial as well, so that when those roads intersect, those would be included as well. So this is cleaning up the inconsistency with the existing plan. And one of the things when we look at these costs is this is full development of the streets. Now, one thing we've got to be careful of is if you don't have improvements like curb and gutters or sidewalks, then the fact that we're either moving or putting those same type of infrastructure in, we could not include that in the infrastructure improvement plan. But those widening of road projects that we're looking at have these enhancements in them. Okay, so as Lori mentioned before, right now we're putting the full cost that we feel is defensible into here, including utility relocations. You have these enhancements that are there that otherwise are functioning, but because you have to widen the road, you have to dig them up and move them. And I will say that's a significant cost on these street fees than what you had before, versus what you have right now in your existing plan is just basically to widen and pave the road without all the other enhancements. The other thing on the streets is, this is, as I mentioned before, the one fee that has a north separated from the central. Again, there's projects on both sides of I-10, which is the separator, mostly 4-lane, some 6-lane widening, that are going to move traffic, either north-south or east-west as well. And when we looked at it and looked how, the complexity of keeping the fees separate, because again, if you collect from the north and the central, you can only spend those funds in those areas. So there's a benefit there of sort of widening your area on the streets. So we're, at this point, look at combining those together. And on the next slide is the north-central combined.
Joanne?
Quick question on, so just to make sure I got this, on the sidewalks and curbs and gutters, we've had multiple discussions, and I know we've put it, I think, in the CIP on the sidewalk issues and the curbs. But areas in town that were missed with those sidewalks and curbs and gutters would not be in this. We're just going to be doing that with general fund money, correct? That's what I'm making sure I understand it right. Okay, thank you.
Joe?
Do we, do you know what the philosophy was on the prior fees that were adopted? Why the things that we're putting in or suggesting putting in this new philosophy was not covered in the prior? Do you know what the driving factor was, that why it wasn't included?
I do not. There's, I know in some of the other fees, and I don't recall it specifically on streets, but I know, for example, in parks, it was pretty explicit that there was a limit to maintain the costs and not to have to overcommit to building, for example, parks and so forth. As far as the existing streets, I can't really speak to why it was limited to 6-lane arterial, when most of your needs are 4-lane. So.
I'm just
Mayor,
wondering if it
council
was-
member, yeah, we also tried to look at what the logic or the reasoning behind the choices of what projects were put in, and it's not clearly laid out in the existing plan or the notations that we have. So that's why we felt it was very important to develop a very clear philosophy for streets.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if there was a cost factor involved to try to mitigate, the price, the total price, if that went into the, I'd just be curious why, because it seems logically you would want all of that in there, and why wasn't in there? I'm sure there was something, but it would be nice to know what, what that was.
It did, I believe it tripled at the time. That could have been influenced, but I'm
Okay.
conjecture, really.
Holly?
I would like to know regarding the curb sidewalks and all of that, when you're going to incorporate that in the street philosophy, are you putting the sidewalks on both sides of the street? Please do.
I reminded her of that. so you're
Yes,
getting
she
that
did.
question. Best you to ask now.
Yes, thank you. I did.
Mayor,
Okay.
Mayor,
Joanne?
vaguely I remember that we had the conversation, and I don't know if this has anything to do with 4 lanes or 6, but it was the fact we kept discussing complete streets, sidewalks, curbs, bike lanes. We don't say bike lanes in here, but that was considered a complete street. And I just want to make sure that we don't lose sight of that, because we did address complete street. Now, not everywhere is going to have makes sense to have a bike path.
Right.
But on some of the main roadways, it does. And so that's just one thing I realize is not in here.
Just to address that, I don't believe they're in here, and that's one area where if there's not bike lanes there, then we'll have to be careful, at least for the fees. Again, that would be other parts of the general fund.
True.
If it's
not already
increasing level of
there,
service.
I think we found that
Expand it.
already.
Understood.
We're
But then if you-
already into that one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But if the city and the council went in that direction in the future, and that was your standard, then you expand your
I think
opportunities.
that's what you talked about, bike lanes, and I think didn't we have a session on that? We wanted to incorporate, we want the bike lanes in, so we aren't taking a street and making it smaller. Sherry?
If we want that to be our standard, and we do have it in some streets now, I guess I'm kind of at a loss of how we
How we got
use
it.
that, because we do have it as a standard on our streets, on a lot of them. I'm not quite sure
Mayor, council members,
where it needs to go.
we can go back and more closely evaluate the current status of bike lanes and see if we can incorporate bike lanes here. Again, if it has to exist today, and so if it exists today, you know, and I'm just conjecturing, if it exists today on 5% of the arterial streets, perhaps we can include 5% of the cost of bike lanes on these projects. But we'll have to go back and investigate that, knowing that that's a concern of yours.
So
But
if we do
it
5,
seems to me, don't you think, I'm sorry, it seems to me that we had no consistency. We've been here, Ron and I have been here 20 years. And so there wasn't any consistency on it. So every time a road got built, it doesn't matter, the bike path was in, nor were there any connectivity between the different communities. They just, I'm sure it's cost. I mean, I don't know why before that.
if we have it on 5%, and
Sure,
then we
go ahead.
can, if we say, if we have it on 5%, so we can use it on 5% for this, then once we're done with this plan, we now have it on 10%, so next time we can use it on 10%, so we can just keep multiplying.
And yeah, Mayor and Council, so we will definitely explore that. And we can also, again, use we can put a priority in our use of our general funds to add bike lanes to existing roads to get that service level up for the next time we do an update as
But
well.
there's been a request to be a bike city, and there's no way we can be a bike city because we don't have the mileage bike paths to make that. Brandon?
So you're saying if a road had 10 feet of bike lane, then we can extend it, it would count to extend it the rest of the hundreds of miles, or how far that road would go, type thing?
What I'm saying is we'll go back and we'll evaluate a concept like that. I don't know, we'll have to evaluate what the current status is and come up with a theory for how we could address bike lanes in the plan. But that's the kind of concept.
All set? Go ahead.
Okay, first, the streets north central, so the improvements are 18.3 lane miles and 4 traffic signals. This is an escalated cost, and I have a subsequent slide that breaks this down because it's a big number in this plan, $122 million. I want to point out that the actual, looking at the infrastructure that would be supported by growth is actually greater than this. You know, and this is already a significant investment. So we just want to point that out. There's a relatively small loan from the general fund that's already funded some road growth improvements, and those are included as well to repay the general fund loan. And then we have some existing balances as well. So the net is $120 million over 10 years, and these projects are pretty well spread across the 10 years. They're not front-loaded or back-loaded. Here, the service units are a little bit different in the vehicle miles traveled, but similar concept of breaking everything down to resident and commercial. Cost for vehicle mile travel is $457, $458. A single-family fee converted, it's $8,911. So this is the biggest single increase of any of the fees. It's substantial, and there's no denying that. But again, looking at the ratios, what we're seeing is there's justification for this level. And we've, again, it's a significant increase, and we're still looking at it as the improvements, are they all justifiable in here? And you see the level of service of 1.12 lane miles per 10,000 and the traffic signals as well. The projects themselves, here's the projects, and you can see the lane miles for each and the current cost. The total there is $100.8 million on today's dollar. So depending on when it is, you'll see the escalated cost with 3% per year. And so the total of the escalated cost is $122 million to match the previous slide total. So significant improvements. They're located both north-south of I-10, different parts of the city, and some of them do span a pretty good length, depending on the improvements. And some of them are just intersections. As I mentioned before, there was four intersections included.
I think Joanne has a question. Joanne?
So this is where inflation or just cost of the project wasn't calculated. So of all of these projects, what's the delta between them all? Did you, the delta, what was the difference of all of these together? And does that mean then that we have to use general fund monies to make up for it since it wasn't already calculated at the?
Mayor, council member, I don't have some of these streets are new to the impact fee plan because we're adding more years because we're forecasting further out. What we can do is we can come back and we can tell you of the projects that were already in the CIP or the plan, what the cost change is. And later on, you'll see the significant increase in the fee as a result, but we'll get you that information.
All right, thank you.
Go ahead. That's a good one.
In the south, there's really one major improvement is the expansion of Estrella Parkway in the bridge from 2 to 4 lanes. That's 2.02 lane miles. It's $33 million. Plus, there's a traffic signal as well. And what that does is it currently with the 2 bridges you have 2.4 lane miles, and this would increase it by just over two more lane miles. But at the same time, the population down there is about doubling. So if you think about the ratios, you could really just a simple ratio. If you're doubling your population, can you double? If you're at capacity now, or approaching capacity, could you double the lane miles from a simple ratio? Here it's just under that with that improvement. So one of the things that we're still looking at is all the 10-year growth is assigned is the growth. The expansion is attributed to the growth in 100% of the 10 years. One of the questions out there is, well, should it be is it more residents beyond 10 years that benefit or not? And from the ratios that we looked at, it looks like, well, it fits in that 10-year window when you think about doubling the population in that time frame. So that's a significant cost down in the south. That puts your single-family fee in the south at $6,380. But I just want to point out that one project is really the big driver. The Estrella Parkway and Cotton is a significant one on the traffic signal as well. It's $7.1 million.
Jerry?
I know we talked about a long time ago because there was the Cotton Lane Bridge we have a reimbursement some point from the developer there, and then part of that Kings Ranch property goes towards this bridge. Is there any such development agreement for reimbursement with them for this bridge? Because this would also bump up against their property?
Mayor, council member, I'm not aware of any development agreement that would help fund this particular item. We will research that. That's one of when we get to the end of this, we have some technical things that follow up on, and we still have some more checking to do against existing development agreements, but off the top of my head, I'm not aware of any.
Okay, yeah, because that area I think was supposed to all be commercial, and then there was supposed to be houses and apartments with Kings Ranch. I didn't know if we had an agreement for this one too.
Joanne?
Well, I just want to say thank you for putting the bridge in there because I believe that this was something that looking out 10 years is definitely, people ask about it now. So I'm glad that it's in here. Thank you.
Well, I like the idea it's public because the public keeps talking about it. So they can, I'll give them a minute, so they can see a figure now of how difficult it is to get there and what contribution they want to make to get there. Joe, did you have a question? Okay.
Okay, the next one is water, which is, we call it North and Central, but it's essentially central. I believe there may be a small area, but we call it North Central. So the next one is going to be south, and I'll talk about both of them because the driving project for both areas is the surface water project. And so that's a significant project for the city, $114 million. And it's built for 8 million gallons a day. There's an agreement with Newland for part of that capacity. And so the central area, about 5.35 million gallons a day, that capacity. And then the Newland and the south area, about 2.65 million gallons a day. Now, you'll see here under the row surface water plant only 3.33 million gallons a day. That's because plant's being sized, for the future as well. So we can only include the next 10 years. So $75 million of that cost. And there's some oversizing in there as well that we can't include. So it's $75 million of that cost in the 10-year period. And I'll speak to the south fee part of that in just a minute as well. In addition to that, there's existing lease with the Gila River Indian community, and there's some transmission storage improvements as well. And there are some existing balances, and we do need to account for, because you have a dedicated source of rate revenue, that any development that pays fees, that we have some level of credit that if they come online, especially early, that if they're paying fees that have any component of debt service, that we do have some level of credit there as well. So the net total of all that over the 10 years is $72 million. The average cost per single family fee is $8,719. The level of service is 402 gallons a day. That's based on your integrated water master plan, which was done about 2 years ago. Slightly higher than the existing at 390 gallons a day. So that's a little bit higher than the current level of service. So for the south, I mentioned before about the allocation to the plant. A significant portion of the Newland agreement of 2.65, about 2.49 million. Actually, I misspoke. This 2.49 million includes some of the surface water plant and includes what's called the Northern Solutions, which is some wells located outside of the area. So it's a mix of the two. And basically what you do is over the next 10 years, there's 2.49 million gallons a day needed. So you exhaust the rest of the Northern Solutions, and then you start going into the surface water plant. Both of those are reimbursements. So those are funds that Newland funds and then gets reimbursed through these fees. There's two other projects as well, the Rainbow Valley Water Campus Booster Station and a new project, a reservoir project, $4.6 million. So altogether, it's $50 million. You look at the growth of the next 10 years, it's just over $8,000 on the south. Again, that level of service is 402 gallons a day. It's the same water facility that for the future growth as well for both the north central and the south water. And finally, the last two are wastewater. So in wastewater, the growth demand is not as much as 1.26 on the north central. The reason for that level of service in the integrated water master plan is actually lower. It was 170 gallons a day, 175 gallons a day. It's now 140. So the amount of wastewater treatment and disposal needed is less over that 10 years period if you compare it to the water. So this is expansions to the Goodyear Water Reclamation Facility in here over the next 10 years. And there are existing balances, and we do account for credits from any new growth that becomes ratepayers as well. This fee is actually lower than existing at $2,130 in the south. Here.
And I'll point out this is a correction to a slide. We had duplicated the data from the north slide into the top section of here. So this is data that you don't have that's shown on the screen right now.
Everything from 13,429,000 down is the same, but the details above it are different. I apologize for that. So here, the wastewater improvement, there's two plants in the south. There's the Corrugate and the Rainbow Valley. And so this growth demand includes, the Rainbow Valley is a reimbursement, again, to Newland. So part of it is the existing reimbursement, and then there's expansion to that facility planned in the next 10 years to meet the demands of growth. So that's in there as well. And those are really the two major improvements that make up the total of that's $13,433,000. So that's essentially most of those. $13,400. So the fee per single family is about $2,100 there as well. Again, the level of service is lower, which has some bearing on those fees. So we've got through all 11 fees. So just kind of in summary, first the North Central, just to recap what's happening each of the fees. The police, you see the increase from 379 to what's calculated 846. Why the increase? The radio tower is not in the existing infrastructure improvement plan, so we have that in there. The cost updates and inflation. The fire, there's additional fire facility. The cost updates and inflation there as well. You see the increase. Parks is a significant increase. We have additional parks, cost updates, inflation, and inclusion of financial costs, financing costs. And I would say, again, the existing infrastructure improvement plan was intentionally limited. It said that very explicitly. So this, as calculated, would be a change in that philosophy, at least to maintain that level of service. The roads north and central are shown here, and you see the north is the top line and the central is the bottom, and they're combined together. You see the increase on the north would be just over $7,500, and the central would be just over $7,100. Again, why the increase? There's significant projects, the cost updates, the clear philosophy, including all the improvements that are already on those existing roads, on those road improvements as well. And then water increase primarily due to the surface water plant. That's a significant project for the city, and financing costs for that. And then finally, wastewater is significantly less, and that's a lower service level, and there's also a requirement for developer lines that's not in the fees as well as right now. So in total, for the North Central, if you add up all these fees for residential, it's $14,021. The increase is $9,766 for $23,787. I'll discuss in just a minute how this compares to others. First, the South fees, similar sort of dynamics. The police increasing, the radio tower, and the cost updates and inflation. Fire is actually staying about where it is right now. It's actually lower by $59 with capacity in the existing facilities. Parks, you have additional parks, cost updates and inflation. The streets, you have the bridge expansion. For water, the surface water plant and financing costs. Those fees are already relatively high in the south, so there's not as much movement there. In the wastewater, those fees were really depressed or brought down with the existing infrastructure plan. So these are actually increasing in the south because they're starting at such a low base there. That's based on the cost updates. And so for the south in total, an increase of $7,742 to $20,394. So we recognize that these are significant increases, and we wanted to at least compare to others. And no two communities are alike. They're not. Their geography is different. The point of where they are as far as the growth is different. But you can see here the existing central at $23,787, and the calculated at $23,787, in the south at $20,394. The two major components of these compared to the others, they are higher than the others, and really the streets and the water, the two areas where you saw a lot of improvement costs are the drivers for why these would be higher than the others. Some other communities, such as Surprise, don't have street fees at the moment. Others, such as Peoria, at least the area which is the northwest part of town, has kind of comparable street fees in that area. And you see the other communities anywhere in between. Same in the light blue, the water, the first bar there. You can see some are significantly less, some are a lot more. The city of Goodyear is about to invest significantly in its water treatment and getting its cap allocation treated and delivered down. So, that would be a major driver there as well. Yes.
Question.
Yes.
Joanne?
Actually, more of a comment. I mean, seeing that, it stings a little, yes. But, we have things in our city that not everybody has to deal with. And certainly our water solution is a very large one. But so's that bridge. Not everybody has a bridge over that river to deal with right now. And so, it does. It stings, but it's smart. And it means that the future for our citizens and our future, the current citizens and our future citizens that will be part of that growth will feel good that their city was planned correctly and is looking at the future. So I know I don't like looking at this slide, but it's smart.
And Mayor, Councilmember, we'll add that there are other cities working on updating their plans right now. So we're comparing our predicted fees to fees that exist today. We know several of these cities are on the same path that we are. And when you get to the next slide, I'll talk, basically, we're going to continue to monitor what's happening at the other cities as well.
Joe?
And again, I'm with you, Councilmember, is that if my calculation's right, about 61% is an increase over the south, but 41% of it's streets. All right, so, it goes back to the areas that you talked about, if we change the policy to actually pay for, the streets. And the same thing north, I've got a 69% increase over the current, but the vast majority of that is the streets. So you can argue that percentage increase is because we didn't have, and for whatever reason, and I wish we knew why, but we didn't have those costs in there on those streets. And they, and if we're going to have the philosophy of growth pays for growth, and we're going to make sure that bridge is taken care of, and we make sure, we keep the roads going. If we don't do this, you're just going to fall farther and farther behind. I mean, that's the bottom line. So, and again, when you look at it in that perspective, you can understand what's driving these numbers.
Can I just make a comment? We've had different councils, different years, different philosophy. And I can tell you the philosophy has changed from 2005 tremendously. So that's probably, in my view, I think that's one of the reasons. Who's next? I'll go to Brandon. I'll give you first. Go ahead, Brandon.
I agree with them that we need to plan for our future. So, our future residents will thank us for these infrastructure projects now. I had a quick question. You might have already mentioned it. What's the general gov that Avondale and Gilbert has? The yellow one, the orangey yellow?
This, Mayor, council members, the statute, when it changed in 2014, removed the ability to have fees for general government facilities such as the city hall. So if you already had a fee in place and were paying debt service relative to those fees, you could continue to collect it, but you cannot collect new fees for those types of facilities. So I don't know specifically what those cities did. They could be city halls, they could be public works facilities.
Well, I could tell you what they did, but I could tell you how they got the city halls and how I didn't get it. So, Sherry?
Yeah, yes, I think it's also going to be really important when you come back, as these get updated by the different cities, that we have an asterisk that they're older ones, because it is a little shocking when you see it. But I think if you look at it another way, with the asterisk that these are their current fees compared to our current fees, and that they're looking to change theirs, you've got a couple very developed cities there. And when they changed the law in 2014, it hurt us undeveloped cities, and there's nothing we can do about that. But I think we look at Peoria and Gilbert, both are very developed cities. Our new fees are not substantially more than Gilbert's. If you look at, a couple of them, they're not substantially more, they're higher, but than their old fees. So I think that's an asterisk as they get updated. So we know which ones are the new fees and which ones are the old fees. So we're not comparing apples to oranges.
We'll do something to make sure it's very clear.
Wally?
Well, without roads, we can't develop, and we don't have infrastructure in a lot of the places, and it's really critical that we plan for the future because we want development to come to Goodyear, and it may cost us more, but it's because we do not have anything there now, and we need to plan ahead. So thank you for the breakdown to show us that you're trying to incorporate all the additional expenses that we as a council will bear if we don't plan smartly. I mean, we're a smart city. There we go.
Joe?
Yeah, I just want to add one other perspective is when you look at these pricing, if we don't put it on the impact fees, where growth pays for growth, then that means the current residents are going to have to pay for it because it's going to have to come out of our general fund. So I suspect when you put it in that perspective, I suspect a lot of the people that are here will not have an issue with these fees.
So I see we have 3 slides left.
Would you like to?
So it's 5:46. Do you
Okay.
think we can do that?
Yes, we
And-
can.
Oh, well, you go for it.
All righty.
Go for it.
So I just want to let you, so basically just what we have left to do is kind of update you on what the next steps are, what the process is. So staff are going to continue to look at some technical aspects, such as the discussion Tony had on the bridge, whether that growth is appropriate to remain only within the 10 years. I mentioned the development agreements, that we have to continue to look at those, monitor the other cities. And we're going to continue to review the growth assumptions, what's actually happening. We'll look at inflation as we award more bids, and we'll look at costs as well as we continue to move through. We'll also, we've heard some discussion here today about the concept of growth paying for growth and the types of infrastructure. That's certainly areas as we go forward where we'll be looking for more input from you and the public. So the recommendation of where we're going in this process is that the next step is that we would post the reports that outline the land use assumptions and the infrastructure improvement plan as we've outlined for you today. Our intent is to schedule some stakeholder meetings to gather input from the community that will be impacted by this. And then, as I said, continue our technical work and analysis so that we can come back with more information based on the feedback that we receive. The statute lays out a very long process for implementing these fees. We did meet with Newland already to start a conversation with them about the South area, and we've been looking at their questions and their feedback. We're having this session now. We're on a path to have these new fees be effective by January 1. Backing up from there tells us that by March 21st, we would need to post the plans that I just talked about. Then it's, we have 60 days that those would need to be posted before we have a public hearing. And during that time is when we would hold stakeholder meetings to make sure that we got the input. We would hold a public hearing in late May, and then we have to wait 30 days before we can implement, before you can then approve the plan. After that plan, as those 2 plans are approved for the land use and the infrastructure, we then begin the process of implementing or adopting the fees. So within 30 days of your approval of those plans, we would have to act to post the intent to raise the fees within 30 days, or 30 days later have a public hearing, and then 30 days after that you would vote on those fees, and then it's 75 days until the fees become effective. So most of the time we have left is waiting and gathering input according to the statutory process. And with that, are there any other questions or discussion?
Pretty much asked our questions, and I'm going to adjourn this meeting, and we're going to come back to it, okay? Because we have to start the other one at 6 o'clock, and I don't think 10 minutes is enough for the next one. So, compliments. I think this was great information and well organized and very useful. I saw a couple of those things we could just copy off that and use. So we really appreciate your hard work, okay? All right, thank you very much. Where's the city clerk? Can I just do
So we're just in recess.
a recess? Okay, I'm going to recess this, and at 6 we're going to do the Is it there? No, I don't know where it is. Just a minute, I've lost it. All right, I'm looking for the agenda because I can't find it. The last, oh, that's it, the last one we had, okay.
2.
All right, she's up there, so go ahead, just introduce yourself and we'll get this in a minute.
Thank you, Mayor. Karen Craver with the Planning Division.
Here it is.
And we're talking about commercial parking standards tonight. At the request of the council, staff compared Goodyear commercial parking requirements with the 7 Valley cities you see on the screen. And they're the same cities that we looked at when we looked at industrial parking requirements. And the goal of this research was to determine if we were requiring too much parking, and that was why you see some pretty large empty parking lots around the city. In terms of the retail trends, the graphic shows you that Goodyear and 4 other cities are right in the middle. There are 2 cities that have a higher parking requirement at 1 to 250, and there's 1 city that has a lower parking requirement at 1 to 375. And here's an example of how that plays out with a 30,000 square foot building. We in the 4 other cities would have 100 spaces, 2 other cities would have 120, and 1 other city would have 80 spaces. In terms of restaurant, we compared the requirement for public area, which is the indoor dining area of restaurants. We are at the higher end of the requirement, but so are 3 other cities at 1 space per 50 square feet. 2 cities have 1 space per 75, and 2 more cities have 1 space per 100 square feet. The ancillary facilities, all the cities kind of do them differently, so we just compared the indoor dining portion. And how that works out for a 5,000 square foot restaurant with 3,000 square feet of public area is that we in the 3 other cities would have 60 spaces, 2 other cities would have 40 spaces, and 2 other cities would have 30. Regarding professional office, again, we're not the highest and we're not the lowest. Another city has the same parking requirement that we have. And 1 city doesn't have a professional office parking requirement at all. And for a 50,000 square foot building, this is how it would play out. Goodyear and the 1 other city would have 167. 3 of the cities would have as much as 200. 1 city would have 143 spaces, and still another would have 133. This is for medical office. Again, we are at the higher end, but the requirements aren't all that different between the cities. 150, 200, 350, and 400. And for a 40,000 square foot medical office building, we'd have 267. 3 of the cities would have 200. 1 would have 114, and 1 would have 100 spaces. These are some of the differences that we found when we did the comparison. 3 of the other cities actually set maximum allowances. They have a required amount of parking that you have to meet, but then you can only go up to a certain level beyond that. All 3 of the cities do it in retail. The cities were Avondale, Glendale, and Surprise. 2 of the cities have the maximums in professional office, and 1 of them has it in medical office. And the interesting thing we found in Avondale, they require 10% of required parking and the office components to be covered parking. We also reached out to the retail development community, and we found that it's a very standard thing that many of these retail tenants require parking agreements with these developers before even coming into the city. And a couple of examples that we found, the market at Estrella Falls, our code required just over 1,500 spaces, but those tenants required that there be over 1,800. Canyon Trails was even significantly higher, and going from over 2,800 to over 4,300. And of course, most of these parking requirements that have created these parking agreements that have created these large parking lots were before the advent of Uber and Lyft and all the online shopping that you see happening, but nonetheless, those large parking lots are there. And so based on our findings, the Goodyear requirements, fall in line with other cities. Sometimes we're higher, sometimes we're lower, but all within a general realm. And that these commercial tenants are driving the size of the parking lots. We didn't see that amending the commercial parking requirements was necessarily warranted at the moment, but certainly if council would like to see some adjustments to some or all of the uses, we'd be happy to do that and bring back a text amendment.
Thank you. Any comments on this? Yes, Councilman Pizzillo?
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. If the tenants are driving the requirements, if we lower them or increase it, the tenants are going to decide what they want based on. And as time goes on and there's more people, I guess with the internet or Uber or whatever the case may be, maybe they will drive down some of them. But based on the information that you presented, I don't see any reason to change them at this time. That's just my own opinion.
Vice Mayor?
My question, Karen, is there a separate requirement at the theater? Because the theater doesn't fit in any of the categories that you talk about.
The requirements for theaters are based on seating, I believe. One per 3 seats, we believe. But yes, it's based on the seating within the theater as opposed to just square footage of building.
Okay, because we continually have complaints from people going to our new theater that there's not enough parking. Well, they're sold out. I mean,
It sells out all
it
the
sells
time.
out a couple of weeks ahead.
That's a good problem to
It's
have.
wonderful, yeah.
I don't know how you would change something.
Well, we
you know.
don't, but I just want to make sure that if we're lucky enough to get another theater somewhere, that we take in consideration.
I'll tell you, get more parking spaces for that restaurant they're going to put in there.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh.
I don't want whatever it is for the theater to be counted towards the restaurant parking, because there won't be any parking at the restaurant because everybody at the theater will use that. So we just want to be sure you're thinking about it.
And I appreciate that comment, Wally, that what I'm seeing it, this is just Joanne's look at it, is that, as I said, I think last week or the week before, that last year was the first year that restaurants sales exceeded grocery store sales. Mm-hmm. And so, as you look at the uses of restaurants and holistically, as you see where restaurants want to share parking spaces with other areas, I think that's something that you really need to be, thoughtful of. And the other thing, I also kind of recognize, you said that we were at the high end for medical. That's another field that I see that seems to be always very full in people parking there. And so just watching that, that continues to grow. That's not going to stop healthcare. And so watching where we fit with that. As for retail, though, I think that's something in the future that may decline in parking. But I think the real catch there is going to be about that shared parking and who's sharing what. Because if you have medical sharing with restaurants, that could be a problem. So it's going to be, what's that combination of things?
Any other comment? Brandon?
Yeah, I think, I tend to agree with you as well. I mean, I think things are going to change, and we don't want to handcuff somebody and make them put extra parking spots in there, but we want to have the flexibility to be able to meet all their customers' needs. So I think we're good right now. The only question I had is, the only thing I can think of as unique is like a church in a commercial development area. I don't know if there's any requirements for that. I'm just thinking of the Palm Valley, where they're sharing. I know they're doing really well there. It's marked off well and things like that. I don't know if that's something we address at all in anything else, or a Goodwill, I guess, or something, or I don't know.
Mayor, Councilman, our church parking requirement is again based on seating area, and then there's also for offices and classroom areas, there's additional parking requirements for that. And you're correct, it's worked out very well for Palm Valley Church. And we have some other church startups that come into centers like this, into the smaller industrial centers. And that's something we always check on before we issue the occupancy approvals, is to make sure there really is enough parking there in those centers.
Yeah, and I guess the only other place I could think of is like where CrossFit is, and some of the businesses in there. There's always a struggle sometimes in those areas where there's a lot of good activity going on, and certain parts of the day it's busier than others. So, yeah.
It's a good place for smaller businesses to get started in
start
some
and
of
grow
those
and then-
industrial
yeah.
complexes. So we always check about the parking to make sure it'll work.
Well, I appreciate you looked into it, and I think it all comes from the shopping centers that are not completed yet, and they have a lot of buildings to put in it, so it's a lot of parking spaces, and so everybody says, oh, we've got too many parking spaces, but they'll eventually going to be filled in. So I appreciate you taking the time, because it did take you time to do this, and it turns out that we don't have to make any change, so I do appreciate your investigation. Thank you.
You're very welcome. We'll keep looking at it.
All right. Are you looking at me to do something, or are you? No. Oh, okay, all right. It's always me. What am I doing wrong here? Okay, you're up. So let me introduce you. Staff will provide council with several options for a city seal and a request for policy direction on updating the city seal. And of course, we have Darcy McCracken, our city clerk. Darcy?
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Thank you very much for letting me present this information to you tonight. So we're here to talk about our city seal. It's not to be confused with our city logo. The logo is the actual marketing symbol that is used on a lot of our documents and on our shirts and PowerPoint presentations. As you can see, it's on the actual PowerPoint presentation I'm using. And it actually was updated several years ago, and it still kept the same look and feel throughout that updating. Now, the seal is an actual emblem that is used on city documents, and on the things that we use to do that is the crimper and the stamp. And it would also be used then also on your the gold foil for your proclamations, Mayor. So this is the cornucopia, and this is what kind of brought this whole discussion forward. I was doing some research and wanted to find out what we were actually using for our seal. The last thing that I could find, or that staff could find, is that we actually had council approve this in July of 1980. And as you can see, it's a very busy seal. It's got the cornucopia in the middle, it's got Aztec lettering around the outside, and it's got a couple of extra little things along the outside as well. But this is what I was actually using for my city seal. So we aren't sure of the history, but we do believe that there were some kind of administrative actions over the last several years that actually made this what was being used then. And as you can see, it's due to its size, it's only going to be about 1.5 inches in circumference, so it's pretty much very small. And so for reproduction, it works best with this design being very simple and bold. There's the fine lines and small details will not reproduce well, because their width would actually be like 1/32 of an inch, which is not very big at all. So staff from communications has actually created a couple designs for you. This is the first one. We're going to call it option A, and it incorporates elements of the city's branding logo. So it does have would create then a continuous impression of the city. And it does have then the same background as the logo and maintains the same look and feel. All three logos that were, or actually not logos, all three seals that we're presenting to you tonight actually do have the City of Goodyear, Arizona, incorporated in 1946 in the outer ring. Here's option B. This version incorporates 4 elements from the City of Goodyear. It's the city's historical connection to cotton, aerospace, and the Estrella Mountain Range, along with the present and future vision of a vibrant, progressive city. And this is option C. And this is very similar to the previous one, option B, but it does drop the cityscape in favor of a less complex graphic. And here they are all together. Now, if there's one that stands out, then we can move forward with that one, or if there's elements of any of them that look better, we could certainly move forward with that. At this point in time, we just would like some kind of guidance from council. Would you like to go back to the approved seal, which is the cornucopia? Do you want to just go with the seal that I've been using, which is pretty bland? Or do you want to use one of the options that staff developed? Or would you like to even send this out to a public process? It's really up to council on what you want to do at this point.
I'm going to suggest, all right, you tell me, I like A. So somebody go down and tell me what you like.
Mayor,
Yes. Joe?
A.
All right.
I like the other one that just had the dots and it just said Goodyear. It's not one of these three. It's the other one.
It's too fadey.
Oh, the incorporated stamp?
Yeah.
Just,
No,
That
yeah,
one there?
that. Because these seals are so tiny, you're not going to be able to see any of those designs on them, even though they look nice here. No
Right.
one's going to know what they look like on that seal, regardless whether you put an airplane on it or something else, because they're really tiny.
right. Now, let me just switch to the Elmo real quick. I do have a couple from other cities.
Yeah, this is what
We've-
everybody uses, yeah.
We've got Glendale here. Up here in the upper right, we've got Surprise. A lot of the other cities do use just the incorporated stamp. We've got the city of Peoria right here in the middle. And here, we have city of Scottsdale right here. And then here we have the city of Phoenix. But as you can tell, the design on Scottsdale's, because it's so small, it doesn't really distinguish what it really is.
It's so tiny.
Question? Well, A and B are both fine with me. I think that A may stand out a little more with the thicker presses, and I know that when my husband has, we have a seal actually, and I see the difference here. But the question I had was, we have our birthday coming up in 2 years. Do any seals ever show, a special year or anything, or does that ever matter?
The ones that we've seen have not shown
Okay.
a lot of the
A
dates.
centennial or a bicentennial, anything like that? They don't, or whatever
We can
you
do
wanna
what
call 'em.
council wants.
Gotcha.
So
I was just asking if you see
Yeah.
those at all, ever.
I personally haven't seen them, but it doesn't mean they don't exist.
Gotcha. Thanks.
Okay.
I think he's in trouble.
These two, I want to go back over there.
You're all going to get changed, so don't worry about it.
Says we can't put Izzy on the seal that we want. Because Jordan killed Izzy. What? I would say I think A stands out the best. I'm okay with B, but the cotton looks like a tooth to
Yeah,
me,
it's
so
kinda
maybe without the tooth. But I think A is the one I'm leaning towards. But I'm good.
Oh, it's great.
So,
Yeah, I'm better with that.
I like A, but I do like the idea of having our history in C. It's a little less busier than B, but to her point as well. So I had some comments from Goodyear residents saying that they thought it looked like what was it, popcorn?
Yes.
Or some other things that weren't cotton. So if we're gonna go with cotton, we gotta go all the way with cotton.
Didn't look like cotton.
So, but I like A. So.
Anybody on this side? A.
So it's sounding like A?
Sounds like A.
All right, thank you.
All right, thank you very much. And Darcy, I have to say, you've done very well. If you come in and kind of
We
look
can
at
bring that with
records.
RC.
and
You'll be
cleaned up
bringing that back
things.
for council approval.
Absolutely.
Yes. Thank you for making that legal. But it's great. You've come back and made a lot of changes and cleaned up things. We greatly appreciate it, so thank you. Okay, let me see. I think that's it. So I think we had all our information and so forth. So I think we are ready to tell you that the next meeting will be a special meeting on March 5th, 2018 at 4:15, and followed by a work session and a regular meeting. So with no further business, is everybody done here? I'm going to adjourn this meeting.